I'm really excited to be here, honored. This is going to be fun and exciting, and my hope is that we get into maybe some slightly controversial territory, but also some inspiring stuff. So let's roll. I'm going to start by breaking the cardinal rule of technology, apparently. There we go. Of presentation, which is reading from the screen, so my apologies. The future offers us basically three possibilities. The most gruesome is the chance that we might fail to stabilize our world and through successive catastrophes regress as far back as the Ik tribe, which is a tribe in Uganda. Only slightly less frightening is the vision of fixation in the amber, orange, green societal complex. This might resemble George Orwell's 1984 with its tyrannic, manipulative government glossed over by a veneer of humanitarian-sounding doublethink and moralistic rationalizations, and is a very real possibility in the next decade. The last possibility is that we could emerge into the teal level and proceed towards stabilizing our world so that all life can continue. This is Clare Graves in his 1974 article. This is happening right now. We are oscillating between 1 and 2. This is the present moment. I won't go into the whole background of the meta-crisis, the poly-crisis. Plenty of other people have talked about this. But this is the moment that we find ourselves in. And it is. We are literally in the momentous leap. It's happening right now. So part of the conversation that we need to have is how we use business and entrepreneurship as one of the ways to move from 1 and 2 into 3 and get this thing on the right track. So my goals today are to incite heretical entrepreneurial action, to elucidate challenges and solutions for state and stage advanced entrepreneurs, and to paint a post-capitalist, post-materialist, post-individualist picture of awakened entrepreneurship. Just a small task. So a couple of confronting questions as we get into this whole topic of business. The first is, what aspect of the meta-crisis is not currently benefiting some business? These businesses are making money on the meta-crisis. Not okay. A little suspicious, right? If you'd like a stack of some of those, we have that happening over here. And really, business has been the functional mechanism for modernity's death grip on humanity. I believe that while I love business, I think there should be business, I think there should be capitalism, there is some real fundamental issues with the way business is happening in our world that we need to take a look at, and that's what we're doing today. Corporations have essentially become entities and sanctioned profitable harm. Okay, so really, business in itself is not evil, obviously, but it is a vehicle by which evil in our world is being perpetrated. And the business space tends to be filled with a lot of kind of sunny side thinking, because as entrepreneurs we need that. You know, it's a hard life as an entrepreneur to get out there and make a difference in the world. So we need inspiration. We need something that helps to lift us up and carry us forward. But we as integralists and as world changers and mass perspective takers need to be having this conversation as well. And I believe it's time for a reclamation. And this happens naturally by developing Beyond Orange, but really what it requires is integral entrepreneurs. So why entrepreneurs? I'm going to go through this a little quickly. Really, in Integral, I've looked at a lot of the literature, and most of the literature in the Integral corpus is all about corporations. It's all about the structure of how you bring integral ideas into corporations. And this is the work of Frederick Laloux and Keegan and Sisodia. And really, entrepreneurs are so important because they're living at the active edge. They are at the leading edge of what has to be created in the world, because that's where the opportunity lives. And because of that, and them being decision makers, They are inherently developmental because they're looking for edges. They're looking for the next thing all the time. The challenge is, and I'll get into this in a minute, is that the markets and the structures are orange. So we have people who are seeking development within a context of orange business, orange market, orange structure. They are incentivized to create solutions, and that is really the most exciting thing to me about entrepreneurship in the meta crisis, is that if we frame the solution in the right context, in the right light, there's really an opportunity to mobilize people into creating the solutions that we need. And I see integral organizations at the corporate level as decentralized and arboreal, meaning as a tree. So there's a lot of spread of canopy, and as they decentralize, there's a lot of cover. But really, integral entrepreneurs are mycelial. They're coming from the bottom up, and there's a spread throughout a much larger swath of the marketplace because they're not as focalized into a big corporate entity. Okay, so I'm not going to belabor you with all of the stuff that you already know about these levels, but I do want to paint a couple of specific points. So the business structures that usually form within these levels, at the amber level you have your mom and pop hardware store. At orange you have the classic corporation, the birth of capitalism, kind of that spirit of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. At green, you might have the nonprofit, the NGO, or the beginnings of the B Corp. And at teal, you have the B Corp, the holacracy, and the deliberately developmental organization. But these are all existing under a bell curve of the standard distribution of society. So this is work that was talked about a couple decades ago in the spiral dynamics literature, and there's been some contention with the actual percentages, so we're not going to go into that, but you can see that the way that society is laid out, the standard center deviation under the bell curve is mostly amber and orange. And this means that most of the people existing in the market are operating from that level of development. And the green tends to be pushed to the outer boundary, and then teal even farther beyond that. This is important because if that is the center mass of the culture, and that is the center mass of where organizations are created, and that's what gives rise to capitalist economies, and our developmental levels for most spiritual, conscious, and integral entrepreneurs are beyond that, that means that orange markets, while they are agnostic to post-orange values, and they don't exclude anyone, they aren't designed for them. This is a really interesting consideration that I've seen in all of my consulting and coaching for people who consider themselves conscious, spiritual, or integral. It's like, why don't I fit into the market? I'm doing all the things that people who are not as awake and aware as I am, but it's not working. Well, you can't reduce yourself back down into an orange box to make it work. There's a fundamental difference in the developmental process, and that means that the way you have to approach business is different. So this really creates more drag for spiritual entrepreneurs. Okay, I want to let you know that I chose my most corporate background for orange entrepreneurship. Do you feel like you're in a cubicle right now? So developmentally, in orange, usually all of the energy of the being goes into the cognitive, objective, materialist frame. And in the emotion, it's really all about striving. And if you look at orange, it's really where the ego peaks. But really, there's almost nothing typically going on in the spiritual space. And this advantages them because they get to deny their self, their inner space, their feeling, their sensory. And that tends to, because they're not connected as much to the interpersonal, extract from the we space. And they get to create the orange it. So when I spoke at the Integral Conference in Budapest, I made the argument that most of the meta crisis is a challenge of energy being extracted from the I and the we domains and captured by the it domain. So the it domain primarily being technology, but also being materialism and capitalism and some of these other things that we're seeing in those spaces. So the its of businesses are generated at the cost of the I and the we, and this is Anthony Giddens, the juggernaut of modernity, and also Habermas. So the difference between that and teal entrepreneurship is that there's going to be a wider distribution of the energy that they have. So cognitive, they're looking at multiple perspectives, they're holding things with complexity, they're emotionally sensitive, allowing more flex and flow, more state access, more spirit informed. This advantages them to be outstanding visionaries and to be caring leaders, which are things that are desperately needed, and this disadvantages them in orange marketplaces because of the amount of energy of self that's spread over wider aspects of being. So the picture that we are going to utilize here, and this again is a generalization, but I just wanted to give you an illustration of what this might look like. So if we have the emotional, the cognitive, and the interpersonal as lines, in orange, the center mass of that cognitive line is going to be where most of the energy of self goes. So I'm not saying that they are more intelligent, but more of the energy of self is dedicated to the cognitive. In teal, we might add in a fourth line, and again, this is a kind of a generalization, but you don't have as much energy in that cognitive line. So again, you are reducing yourself to try to go back to an orange way of operating, even though it is somewhat required because you're in an orange marketplace if you want to be successful. So orange markets require focused self-denial of interiors, abstracted desires placed into the it domains, and this is coming through as achievement, as materialism, both scientific and financial materialism, and it relatively disadvantages integral entrepreneurs. Unless I believe integral entrepreneurs must increase the quantity of the energy that they are driving into their organizations and their businesses. And this can happen in a couple ways. One is that typically as people come out of orange and they get more sensitive, there's a type of relaxation of being, which from the healing side and the interpersonal side is really important and necessary. But in the business space, there's a demand for charisma and persona that has to be up front in order for you to translate in a market, in order for you really to be seen and cut through the noise. So I believe we as integral entrepreneurs have to find that again. And especially if you are in a spiritual space, you may need to reconstruct some of that identity that you've kind of allowed to relax through your spiritual practices. So typologically, this might be a little bit more, like I said, forward-facing, a little bit more of that fire energy from an elemental perspective. And this can also be done as collectives. So one of the exciting things here that we as integralists get to try on is what happens when we come together in groups of coherent and really aligned personalities with vision that is the same, moving in the same direction. Can we offset the challenges that we've found of trying to be solo entrepreneurs in an orange market by generating more of that synergistic energy in collectives together? And this is a reclamation of, both for the individual and the collective, power and drive, leadership and steering, personal and collective sovereignty, and the energy that has been bound in the it. So I believe part of what we get to do is extract that energy back out of the it, and like Robin Hood, give it away to the we. One of the other great opportunities for integral entrepreneurs is, if you are familiar with complexity science, there's this idea of being far from equilibrium. And there's a lot of magic that happens far from equilibrium, right? And again, if this is the standard distribution of kind of the developmental levels under a bell curve, this is where you all are, right? So your job is to shine exceptionally brightly and let people know that you have answers, and let them know that you should be listened to. And even in me saying that, I can hear the reflexive orange and green part saying, that's egoic, that's not okay to say. But I really want to claim for us all that it's important that we stand up and say, this is the way, that we actually anchor into our leadership and say, we have more comprehensive, caring, inclusive solutions for all of you. So being the outsider, the liminalist, perhaps even the oddball, you get to lean into that position and say, there's something different, there's something new here, and find that boldness and bring it into your endeavor. So all that being said, I want to paint a vision. And this vision is likely decades down the line, and then we're going to work back to the present moment. So imagine all of your subsistence first-tier needs are met. Desire is extinguished. You've become the Buddha on the lotus leaf. The ego is integrated, open, and relaxed. So it's accessible, it's there, but it's not looking to be propped up. And spirit is awake and alive in you. Why in the hell would you create a business? Right? And this is an important question because it helps us to recognize that perhaps most businesses that exist are created because those things are not happening. Uh-oh. What do we do now? Well, I'm also arguing here that from this state, business and entrepreneurship may arise just like awareness arises in your conscious beingness. If you were in a collective of integral entrepreneurs, if you were in a group where there was spiritual practice, or where there was community, where there was alignment, would you have the ability to sense when that group wanted to do something, or when spirit wanted to do something through you? And this leads us to the opportunity of business as a devotional practice, which I think is really, for most of us, where business is headed, is recognizing that it is a hero's journey and it's a devotional practice, and we get to be engaging in that way. So I would like to see this go into the priest class, or the awakened entrepreneurs, those on the non-dual path, those who are really committed to their spiritual awakening, and the merchant class, those who are doing things in the marketplace, seeing a synthesis of those two things together. And the way I would personally like to see it is real community on land, regenerative farming, self-sufficiency, communities of real spiritual practice where you're practicing together and creating a group field, genuine interconnected families, cooperative and co-regulating nervous system, energetics, relationships to the world, and extracted from modernity and techno-futurism. Not that we don't want to exclude those aspects in self, or that we don't want to participate, but we don't have to constantly be hampered by them. And reducing drag on individuals through aligned, energized community. And within that, the emergent property, the thing that arises, is a guild-structured incubator. So you have a collection of people who are learning building businesses. They're becoming entrepreneurs, which is a whole process, as you know, that's years and years, if not decades and decades. I would like to see a guilding structure, the same way that blacksmiths, the same ways that people who build carriages and any other thing that was part of a guild, where you say, I think I'd like to dedicate my life to this. And someone would take you under their wing, and if you are a blacksmith, you get to, burn iron for the next 2 years as you cut your teeth. And as an entrepreneur, maybe you learn how to write copy, maybe you learn how to build a website, maybe you learn what personal branding is. But it's in this kind of protected process where you are building businesses that generate revenue to support the whole structure. So there's really a top to bottom integration of the learning, the awakening, and the marketplace activity. So the big take home that I would like to see as this comes on board is that businesses become benevolence generating engines. So everything that the business touches, to the best of its ability, of course, is actually creating more benevolence in the world. And this prioritizes cascading ripples of generativity, so there's more generative action happening through business. It's intentionally heretical to the orange marketplace as it exists now. So we need to start tearing down some of what has been built up. This is what, can't remember who it was this morning, they were talking about Shiva and Vishnu. We need some of that Shiva energy to actually tear down the things that are not working. There's a bound energy in the governmental, entrepreneurial, captured and controlled system, and that needs to be dismantled consciously. Same idea, and then obviously second tier solutions oriented. So I think I have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. I've got a couple of closing suggestions for solutions. The first is, as integral entrepreneurs, we need to be neurologically nimble. It's crazy out there. I don't know if you've noticed, especially in the business space. We need to have a nervous system that can actually manage that level of intensity. Being in modernity but not of modernity, in the same way that we are in the world but not of the world. So decolonized, post-materialist, rewilded, ego-integrated, and appropriately amplified. Be evolutionarily heretical. So the things that are not working need our voices. We need to start dismantling some of those things. We need to be a part of what is coming next, and not just from the positive side, as Bucky Fuller would say, but I think we actually need to start being involved in things that tear things down. Number 2. GTBW3 is the good, the true, the beautiful, and the win-win-win. That's my guiding ethos for all business. And then BGEs, I mentioned. Flipping the triple is that extractive process of the we space and the I space that's just feeding the it, which has been the process for the last number of decades. And then being far from equilibrium as an entrepreneur. And then lastly, building integrated communities, guilds, incubators, communities of practice. Be business bodhisattvas. Be awakened. Be in your business. Be enlightened entrepreneurs, and be mystic moguls. And then lastly is have harrowing hope. One of my favorite quotes that I can never find the attribution for is, "When the flood came, I did not run." And I believe that's the moment we're in right now. Is the flood of the change is happening, and it's our job as integral entrepreneurs, as awakened entrepreneurs, to stand as the flood comes and be part of that bulwark that creates what is and what has to be generated next. That's it.
The Q&A is coming up next, but if you'd like to see more about my work, you can go to drmattkay.com or templeofwholeness.com.
It's over, so I'm not sure. There might be time for one quick question.
Thank you. Inspirational poetics of enlightened entrepreneurship. I couldn't help but notice green missing from the entrepreneurship. And I'm just curious, because you went from orange to teal, and I think you're differentiating some of the distinctions between the two. But I also know we're moving through green now, and the economy will, and entrepreneurs that are leading are either, I guess, what does that look like in green? And then as you were speaking, I was like, does that deconstruction happen through green, actually? Some of this dismantling, and is that part of their sort of the cosmic role of green entrepreneur?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you kind of the inside joke that I share with my clients, is that green is where business goes to die. Because there's such and that's a little tongue-in-cheek, obviously. There's a lot of really beautiful and good things that happen in green businesses, but there's such a huge amount of drag pushing against the extraction of themselves from orange that usually I see it's more of a healing phase in business. So recognizing those interiors and becoming sensitive, all of that needs to happen as an entrepreneur, but usually if people are, from what I've seen, just green in business, the business doesn't tend to last super long.
What about the evolution of the entrepreneur through all these different stages? If they have the same company, but they're moving developmentally?
Yeah, my recommendation is that the best they can to hang out in an orange business so they can keep getting paid, even though it's going to be uncomfortable and green, and then as soon as they can jump into something teal, that they hop over green.
I just have a comment. This is so exciting to me because, one of the things I'm wrestling with is how do we bring credibility to integral to the world?
Yeah.
Why hasn't it caught on in the last 20 years? And the marketplace is where things are believable.
Yes.
And I think this is it. This is where we'll actually be able to break into it.
I hope so. Let's do it together.
Sorry, we're out of time.